Hi guys, Arthur from Homeowner DIY. So I'm going to shoot a quick video of the tools, the power tools I will normally use on a job. So when you're using these tools, you always need to be aware, you always need to be cautious. The number one thing is always have your earplugs and your eye protection. I cannot emphasize this enough. I've seen lots of injuries happen. Luckily, it was never to me, so it's just something that you can never get lazy or complacent about. So for our skill saw, also known as a circular saw, it's going to have a capacity plate or a rating plate. So this is 7 1/4, and then the RPM is 5,300 on this saw. So when you guys look at the saw, you have the direction of rotation for the blade. So it goes like this. 24 T, so this blade has 24 teeth. It's 7 1/4. This one is for framing. The rating on the blade is 7,000 RPM, so it's more than enough. You always need to be aware of what the rating is. When you get into fiber blades, if your saw is turning faster than the blade, you can shatter the blade and you can get injured. So something to be aware of. When you guys are using a circular saw or a skill saw, when you cut, so this is our line here, when you cut, one side always has to fall away freely. So in this here, as you get to the end, it'll fall away. If you were to cut right here, once you get towards the end, the whole thing is going to collapse in on itself, and then you're going to bind on the blade. So when you cut, make sure one side will fall away freely. And one other thing that I've done this so many times myself, when you're cutting here, if you notice that you're crooked or you're off on your line, you may want to do this back and forth. But when you start to twist your blade back and forth, what you'll do is you're going to bind the blade up against the wood. And that's what this is. This is burn marks from binding the blade. I still do this, but if you guys are cutting and you notice you're crooked, just continue your cut. If it's plywood, something that's not as thick as this, you can probably get away with twisting your blade a little bit. It's just something that you shouldn't do. I'm sure it also is not good for your blade either. And one other thing, when you guys are using your saw, a framer said this to me a long time ago, I don't remember why, but when you're using your saw, you don't want it to be like this. You always want to raise it a little bit. And ever since I've been told this, I still practice this. And it's now, for me, it's just muscle memory. But whenever you're using your saw, always raise it up a little bit. Take your time. For this saw to work, you have to press the top and then the trigger, and then you can go. And then you have your handle here on top. So I do it single hand sometimes, but when your blade starts to get dull, it gets a lot more difficult to do it. So I would say as a rule of thumb in general, hold here, and then you can go and fly away with your cutting. Make sure your blade is in good shape. You should never cut through nails with this. If you do, you'll just mangle up your blade really quickly. So this is a Sawzall. That's what it says right here, Sawzall. Also known as a reciprocating saw. Milwaukee, as far as I know, was the first manufacturer to develop this saw. That's why they call it Sawzall. This is probably the most universal saw that there is. So you have your blades here. So the blade here is 9 inches long, and then 5, I don't think you can see it, TPI, which is teeth per inch. You can get all sorts of blades. You can get metal blades, you can get finer wood blades. So this saw moves back and forth. This one goes in a circular motion, so you're going to get a rougher cut with this all the time. When you guys are using this saw, you never want to be in the direct line with your saw. So the saw is here, and then you see where my feet is. You don't want to be here, especially if you're cutting overhead and you're cutting through nails. You can get hot metal. You know, you can get hit by it. So as a rule of thumb, this is also for the grinder. You want to stay off to the side. And the fence at the very top here, the fence, make sure that you butt that up tight. So when you're cutting it like this, you can sometimes get away with it out here, but this saw will create a lot more vibration, so it's better to have that fence butted up against the wood. One other thing, if you're cutting really wet wood, it's going to bog your tools down. You'll noticeably hear that the circular saw here and this are slowing down. And if you pick up the sawdust after and you can feel how wet it is, that'll tell you how wet the wood is. So dry wood will go faster for cutting, especially drilling as well. Dry wood is better, but you know, in a construction site, you use what you have to work with. So one other thing about the saw, if you're ever going from one place to another, it's always a good idea to take the battery out. There is a lock here for the trigger, but if you're carrying a bunch of stuff, the last thing you want is to have a saw in your arms, and the grinder is even worse for this. So this is a 4-inch angle grinder, sorry, 4.5 inch. This is a cordless model. This is a corded model. So the grinder, this is a fiber blade made for metal. You can also get a concrete blade, which is here. And then the concrete blade also has the direction of rotation. One thing to keep in mind is when you have a fiber blade like this, you have to make sure that your fiber blade is rated for a higher RPM than your grinder. This one's for rated for 10,000. This one is for 11,000, and then this disc is for 13,000. So if you guys are using a disc that is not rated for the speed of the grinder, the blade can shatter. I remember reading about somebody that they were working in their garage. Blade shatter, went into their leg, and they bled to death because no one else was around. And what they said was that the disc wasn't rated for the speed of the grinder. So when you're using a grinder, you have your direction of rotation. So it goes like this. So you guys don't want to use the grinder up here where the disc is turning towards the piece. Here you'd want to do it like this, where it'll bounce instead of pulling the grinder in. Down here, you can have it, if you're going to be on the bottom side here, you can get away with it being here, because if it pulls, it's not going to pull in, it's going to bounce away. So another thing with the grinder is the same thing, that you don't ever want to cut in line where my feet are. You don't want to be here. You always want to be off to the side. These fiber blades, first of all, they can shatter. Another thing is sparks. If you're cutting through metal, you don't want to be in line here where you're eating your sparks. You always want to be off to the side. And if the blade ever shatters, it'll go in a line, so you'll be out of the way from getting hit. One other thing about the grinder is this thing turns at 10,000 RPM. When you're done your cut, always put it so your blade side is up, and always hold the grinder until it stops turning. Because if you don't, and I've done this with a corded grinder, I caught on the cord, and it was spinning. I flipped it like this, and it started going all over the place. And I cut myself right there on my knuckle. You see the line. I did that 15 years ago. So this thing gouges out. And the reason I caught myself was I was cutting in a tight space, and I should have had gloves on, and I didn't. I made that mistake once. I've never done it again. So this grinder has a guard. That's what this is here. The reason I don't use a guard on the grinder is once the fiber blade starts to get smaller, the guard can get in the way, and you're not going to be able to reach your piece. So in general, I don't actually use a guard on my grinder. So moving on, we have an impact and we have a drill. Impact really is for straight screws. What an impact does is as you use it, it torques your screw in. I think it does a better job with screws. Cordless drill is, you can use it for screws as well. I will use them back and forth, but generally for screws, this is what I'll use. The one thing about the drill is when you're drilling holes, especially when your blade starts to get dull, you can start to move it back and forth, and you can snap your bit off really easy. So it's just something to be aware of. It happens to everybody. But as a whole, these are the tools I will use on most jobs. With these tools, you have so many blades and discs and a variety of everything. You can use this for tiles. You can cut through metal, through wood. You can get other blades as well. The circular saw, generally, I just use it for wood. I have seen people with a fiber blade like this cutting through rebar. I've never done it myself. So, guys, these are the tools that I will use for a job. Again, most important thing is earplugs, glasses, sometimes a dust mask depending on what you're doing, but we'll get into that into a later video. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next project.